Initiates with corresponding directions to other countries and towns of the continent Asia, in order to organize similar brotherhoods there also, while he himself remained in the town Julfapal, from where he guided the activities of these helpers of his. However it might have been, my boy, it then so turned out that almost all of your favorites, those strange three-brained beings, also wished and began to strive with all their spiritualized being parts to have in their ordinary waking consciousness the divine, genuine, objective conscience. And in consequence, most of the beings of Asia at that time began to work upon themselves under the guidance of initiates and priests of the brotherhood Hihtvori, in order to transfer into their ordinary consciousness the results of the data present in their subconsciousness for engendering the impulse of genuine divine conscience. And in order to have the possibility by this means, on the one hand, of completely removing from themselves, perhaps forever, the maleficent consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, both those personally acquired and those passed to them by heredity, and on the other hand, of consciously taking part in diminishing the sorrow of our common endless Father. Owing to all this, the question of conscience already began to predominate at that period during the ordinary process of being existence, both in the waking consciousness state and in the passive instinctive state among your favorites, particularly among those who existed on the continent Asia. Even those three-brained beings of that time in whose presences the taste of this divine impulse had not yet been transubstantiated, but who had in their strange peculiar consciousness, proper to them alone, only empty information concerning this being impulse which could be present in them as well, also exerted themselves to manifest in everything in accordance with this information. The total result, however, of everything I've mentioned was that within 10 terrestrial years there had disappeared of their own accord those two chief forms of ordinary being existence abnormally established there, from which there chiefly flow and still continue to flow most of the maleficent causes, the totality of which engenders all kinds of trifling factors which prevent the establishment of conditions there for at least a normal outer being existence for these unfortunate favorites of yours. And namely, firstly, their division into numerous communities with various forms of organization for external and even internal existence, or as they themselves express it, state organizations ceased to exist. And secondly, in these said numerous communities, there also disappeared, equally of their own accord, those various what are called castes or classes which had long before been established there. And in my opinion, as you also will surely understand eventually, it was precisely this second of the two mentioned chief abnormally established forms of ordinary being existence, namely the assigning of each other to different classes or castes, that had specially become there the basis for the gradual crystallization in the common presences of these unfortunate favorites of yours, of that particular psychic property which in the whole of the universe is inherent exclusively only in the presences of those three-brained beings. This exclusively particular property was formed in them soon after the second Transapalnian perturbation there, and gradually undergoing development and becoming strengthened in them, was passed from generation to generation by heredity, until it has now, already passed to the contemporary beings as a certain lawful and inseparable part of their general psyche. And this particular property of their psyche is called by themselves egoism. Sometime later, in its appropriate place during my further tales concerning the three-brained beings existing on the planet Earth, I shall also explain to you in detail how, thanks to those conditions of external being existence which were established there, your favorites first began assigning each other to various castes, and how, thanks to subsequent similar abnormalities, this same maleficent form of mutual relationship then established there has continued even until now. But, meanwhile, concerning this exceptionally particular property of their general psyche, namely egoism, it is necessary for you to know that the cause of the possibility of the arising in their common presences of this particular property was that, owing always to the same abnormal conditions established from the very beginning, after the said second transapalmian perturbation there, their general psyche had become dual. This became fully evident to me when, during the period of my last sojourn on the surface of this planet of yours, I became deeply interested in the mentioned legomenism concerning the deliberations of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash entitled The Terror of the Situation. I began in the course of my further detailed researches and investigations relating to his subsequent very saintly activities and their results to investigate the causes in which way and why the crystallizations of the mentioned factors obtained from the particles of the emanation of the sorrow of our common Father Creator for the actualizing of the divine being impulse of objective conscience proceeded in their presences, that is to say, just in their said subconsciousness, and thus avoided that final degeneration to which are subject all the data placed in them for engendering in their presences the being impulses, faith, love, and hope. And I was convinced that this strange anomaly there fully justifies one of the numerous wise sentences of our highly esteemed, irreplaceable, and honorable Mullah Nasruddin, which states, "Every real happiness for man can arise exclusively only from some unhappiness, also real, which he has already experienced." The mentioned duality of their general psyche proceeded because, on the one hand, various what are called individual initiatives began to issue from that localization arising in their presences, which is always predominant during their waking existence, and which localization is nothing else but only the result of the accidental perceptions of impressions coming from without, and engendered by their abnormal environment, which perceptions, in totality, are called by them their consciousness. And on the other hand, similar individual initiatives also began to issue in them, as it is proper to them, from that normal localization existing in the presences of every kind of being, and which they called their subconsciousness. And because the mentioned individual initiatives issue from such different localizations during their waking existence, each of them, during the process of his daily existence, is, as it were, divided into two independent personalities. Here it must be remarked that just this said duality was also the cause that there was gradually lost from their presences that impulse necessary to three-brained beings, which is called sincerity. Later, the practice of deliberately destroying the just mentioned being impulse called sincerity even took root among them, and now, from the day of their arising, or as they say, from the day of their birth, the three-brained